I died on a Tuesday. The concrete was cold beneath my back. Blood pooled around my head, warm, then cooling fast. 23 floors above me, a door clicked shut. I heard heels on marble, walking away without hurry. That sound followed me into the dark. There was one thing about that fall nobody knew. I'll get to that. I opened my eyes to sunlight, not darkness. My childhood bedroom ceiling stared back at me. The smell hit first: lavender detergent, coffee downstairs, cut grass through an open window. My hands were smaller, unscarred, 24 years old again. I sat up so fast my head spun. 2 years. I had exactly 2 years before that rooftop. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heart slam against my ribs. Alive. Actually alive. Somewhere down the hall, a hairdryer buzzed. Vivian was getting ready for something, humming to herself, happy in a way I remembered too well. That humming used to comfort me. Now it made my stomach turn. I knew things now. I knew which bank held our father's secrets. I knew which lawyer never lost a case. I knew exactly which smile on my stepsister's face meant a knife was coming. Last time, I hadn't recognized the knife until it was already in my back. This time, I wouldn't blink. I got dressed slowly, watching my reflection like a stranger's. The girl in the mirror still believed in fairness. I almost pitied her. She had 4 days until the reading of our father's will. She had no idea what she was about to hand away or why. Downstairs, Diane sat at the head of the table, sipping tea from my mother's china. My actual mother's china, from before Diane replaced her. The steam curled up past her face, and underneath it I caught her perfume rose, heavy and sweet, the kind that clings to fabric for days. My stomach lurched. That same rose scent had drifted past me on the rooftop, right before the door clicked shut. "Elena. Darling." Diane said. Not looking up. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said. That part, at least, was true. Vivian breezed in wearing my dead father's watch. She hadn't earned it yet, not in this timeline. She would ask for it in 3 days, and Diane would hand it over like a party favor. I already knew the exact sentence Diane would use. I said nothing. I poured coffee instead, and it tasted like nothing at all. "You look tired," Vivian said, studying me over her orange juice. "Working yourself to death at that little firm again?" "Somebody has to pay rent," I said. She smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Must be exhausting, being so ordinary." I'd heard worse from her, later. Much worse. This was only the beginning of a pattern I now understood completely. Small cuts first, testing how much I'd bleed. I smiled back and said nothing else. Silence. This time, was a weapon I intended to use well. That afternoon I drove to my father's old estate, Thornbrook, alone. Salt wind hit me first, sharp and cold off the water. Gulls screamed somewhere above the cliffs. The house itself looked exactly as I remembered from childhood: white columns, ivy climbing the east wall, a widow's walk facing the sea. Beautiful. From a distance. Rotten. Up close. I already knew what was buried beneath the west lawn. Toxic runoff from an old shipping yard, sealed under 15 feet of imported soil. My father had known too. Near the end. He'd taken a loan against the property from a man named Salvatore Reyes, a man who did not accept late payments kindly. The debt was still unpaid when he died. Nobody else knew that. Not yet. I walked the grounds until the sun dropped low and orange over the water. In my old life, I'd fought for this house. I'd cried over it. Hired lawyers for it. Lost sleep for months trying to keep it. It had cost me everything, including, eventually, my life. This time, I intended to hand it over with a smile. Let Vivian want it. Let her fight for it. Let her win. The will reading happened 4 days later, in a lawyer's office that smelled of old leather and lemon polish. Diane sat rigid in her chair, hands folded. Diamond rings catching the light. Vivian crossed her legs, already certain of the outcome. I sat at the far end, hands folded in my lap, watching a man named Harold Pruitt shuffle papers with visible reluctance. The house and grounds at Thornbrook, Harold read, were left jointly to both daughters, to be settled by mutual agreement. Vivian's eyes cut toward me immediately. Sharp and hungry. I don't want it, I said. Before she could speak. Too many memories. Too much upkeep. Take it. The room went quiet. Diane's teacup paused halfway to her lips. Vivian blinked, caught off guard by an easy victory. She recovered fast, though greed always does. Well, she said, smoothing her skirt, if you're sure. I'm sure, I said. I even managed to sound tired about it. Harold looked at me a beat too long, like he suspected something. Smart man. I gave him nothing, just a small, sad smile that I'd practiced in the mirror that morning. Inside, something cold and satisfied settled into place. The trap had a name now, and it wasn't mine anymore. That night, I called a number I'd memorized in my previous life, a private line, unlisted, belonging to a lawyer named Marcus Cole. In my old timeline, I hadn't met him until it was far too late, until the walls were already closing in around me. This time, I called him before anyone else even knew there was a war coming. Marcus Cole, he answered, voice flat with fatigue. You don't know me yet, I said. But you will. I need someone who isn't afraid of Salvatore Reyes. There was a long pause on the line. Everybody's afraid of Salvatore Reyes. Then I need someone who's good at being afraid anyway, I said. I can pay. I can also give you something better than money. What's that? Proof, I said. Enough to end him. He didn't answer right away. Somewhere behind him, I heard a glass set down on a table. Come by my office Thursday. He finally said. Bring whatever you've got. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long moment, my heart pounding. 4 days ago I'd been dead on a rooftop. Now I had a lawyer, a plan, and a debt only I knew existed. Vivian thought she'd won something precious that afternoon. She had no idea what she'd actually signed for. The contract transferring Thornbrook fully into her name would finalize in 3 weeks. Salvatore Reyes didn't know yet that ownership had changed hands. Neither did the bank holding the original loan documents. For now, everyone was still smiling, still toasting champagne over an inheritance that was, in truth, a loaded gun with the safety off. I smiled too, that night, alone in my small apartment. It felt different this time, colder, sharper, entirely mine. Somewhere across town, Vivian was probably already picking curtains for a house that would eat her alive. I closed my eyes and let myself feel, for one private moment, something close to peace. It wouldn't last. It never does. In the beginning. 3 weeks later, champagne corks popped at Thornbrook's East Terrace. String lights hung between the columns, glowing gold against the dark water. Vivian stood at the center of it all in a white dress, laughing loud enough to carry over the waves. She'd invited half the city to celebrate her new house, my old grave, dressed up in balloons. I came anyway, because absence would have looked suspicious. I stood near the bar, nursing a glass of wine I had no intention of finishing. The smell of gardenias and salt water mixed with something sour underneath old pipes. Maybe. Or something worse rising slowly from the soil. Elena, Vivian called, waving me over with a diamond bracelet catching the light. Come see what I did with the west lawn. I'm putting in a pool. A pool. Directly above the buried contamination. I kept my face perfectly still. How lovely, I said. She looped her arm through mine, steering me toward a cluster of her friends, all sleek and glittering and slightly drunk. This is my sister, Vivian announced. She gave up the house voluntarily. Isn't that sweet? Some people just don't have the ambition for nice things. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the group. I let it land, let it sting exactly as much as she wanted it to. Somewhere behind that laughter, a woman in navy blue was watching me with narrowed, curious eyes. I didn't know her name yet. I would, soon enough. To new beginnings, Vivian said, raising her glass toward the sea. I raised mine too, and thought about ticking clocks nobody else could hear. Salvatore Reyes checked his ledgers every 30 days, like clockwork. The next check fell in 11 days. Vivian had 11 days of parties left before the first crack in her perfect new life. I intended to make good use of every one of them. I left the party early, claiming a headache. Nobody argued. Nobody ever noticed when I left a room that had always been part of my old life's problem. This time, it was useful. I drove straight to Marcus Cole's office instead, where the lights were still burning past midnight. His office smelled like leather and stale coffee, papers stacked in uneven towers along the walls. A single lamp threw yellow light across his desk. He looked up when I walked in, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "You look like you came from a funeral," he said. "Close enough," I said. "It's a party for the dead. They just don't know it yet." I laid out everything. I had copies of the original loan documents, notes on the soil contamination, a rough timeline of Ray's collection patterns. Marcus went quiet as he read, his jaw tightening with every page. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his expression. "This is enough to bury 3 people," he said. "Good," I said. "Start with the paperwork. I want everything airtight before he even suspects we're moving." Over the following days, I became someone Vivian never would have recognized: patient, methodical, invisible. I opened a separate bank account under my maiden grandmother's name, funneling small transfers no auditor would blink at. I photographed documents at the county records office, the copier's low hum steady in my ears. I recorded one careful phone call with Ray's assistant, my voice light and unbothered. Fishing for dates. Nobody watching me would have guessed a war was underway. I wore the same tired cardigans. I still worked long hours at my small architecture firm downtown. I still smiled thinly at family dinners, letting Vivian believe I'd faded quietly into the background of her success. That was exactly where I wanted her to think I stood. At work, though, my own quiet war was already losing ground. My boss, Mr. Whitfield, called me into his office on a gray Thursday morning, rain streaking the windows behind him. He didn't meet my eyes at first, which told me everything before he spoke a single word. "The Kessler project," he said finally. "I'm giving it to Vivian's firm instead." "I built that proposal from scratch," I said, keeping my voice level. "She made a stronger pitch," he said, still not looking at me. "Personal connections matter, Elena. You understand." I understood perfectly. Vivian had taken my father's contacts, my research, and my client relationships, then repackaged them under her own glossy new letterhead. In my old life, this exact betrayal had broken something in me. This time, I simply nodded and walked out, already calculating how useful his guilt might become later. That evening, I found comfort somewhere unexpected. An old man named Frank Doyle, who had driven my father for 20 years before Diane fired him without warning, now ran a small carpentry shop 2 blocks from my apartment. Sawdust hung in the air, warm and sweet, mixing with fresh coffee from a chipped mug on his workbench. "You look like your dad tonight," Frank said, not looking up from the chair leg he was sanding. "Same stubborn jaw." "Is that a compliment?" I asked. "Depends how this week goes," he said, and almost smiled. I spent 2 evenings a week there, sanding wood beside him, letting sawdust settle into the creases of my palms instead of the ink stains of contracts. It was the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. Frank never asked what I was building toward. He simply handed me tools and let silence do the rest. I didn't know yet how important his silence would become. 11 days after the party, Salvatore Reyes checked his ledgers, exactly as expected. Vivian had missed the first quiet notice sent to Thornbrook's old mailing address, an address that, thanks to a paperwork error I'd quietly arranged weeks earlier, still routed through my grandmother's account. She had no idea a clock had already started counting down against her. Marcus called me that same night, his voice low and careful. "Reyes' people are asking questions about the transfer," he said. "They want to know who signed the new deed." "Let them find out slowly," I said. "Panic works better in stages." "You're colder than most clients I've had," Marcus said. "I've had practice," I said, and didn't explain further. 2 days later, Vivian's assistant quietly resigned, citing personal reasons that were, in truth, a modest cash offer and a firm warning from a private investigator I'd hired under a false name. It wasn't much, one small thread pulled loose from a much larger tapestry. But Vivian noticed the gap immediately, the first crack forming beneath her polished new life. She called me that week, her voice tighter than usual over the phone. "Have you heard anything strange about the house?" she asked. "Some man keeps calling about paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, my voice perfectly bored. "I don't know, some old loan thing," she said. "Probably a scam." "Probably." I agreed, and felt something click quietly into place. I hung up and sat very still in my kitchen, the streetlight outside casting long shadows across the table. Somewhere across town, a woman who had once laughed while I fell was starting, finally, to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. It wasn't enough yet. Not nearly enough. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, I'd learned, could be patient things. The next morning, I spent 2 hours at the county records office, feeding pages through an old copier near the back wall. The machine hummed steadily, spitting out warm sheets that smelled faintly of toner and dust. My fingers turned gray from handling ink-stained originals nobody had touched in years. A clerk glanced at me twice, curious but uninterested enough to say nothing. I organized each copy into a labeled folder, my hands moving with a precision that surprised even me. This was not the frantic scrambling of my last life, chasing proof after the damage was already done. This was quiet, methodical war. Walking back to my car, I passed a woman wearing rose perfume, and my chest locked instantly, breath catching hard in my throat. Concrete. Cold. Blood pooling warm, then cooling fast beneath my skull. I gripped the folder tighter until the sidewalk steadied itself again beneath my feet. It always came without warning, that scent. I was starting to believe it always would. The following weekend, Diane hosted a smaller dinner at Thornbrook, fewer guests but sharper edges. Candlelight flickered against the dining room's peeling wallpaper, something I hadn't noticed before under the party lights. Vivian arrived late, her makeup slightly heavier than usual, covering faint shadows beneath her eyes. "You look tired," I said, echoing her own words from weeks before. Her smile tightened at the corners. "House projects. So much paperwork. Anything I can help with?" I asked. All false sweetness. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "It's under control." Diane watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, sensing tension she couldn't name. Beneath the table, my phone buzzed once a text from Marcus confirming Reyes had formally requested Vivian's financial records. The first real domino, quietly tipping forward, invisible to everyone at that table except me. Dinner continued as if nothing had shifted. Vivian laughed too loudly at her own jokes, her wine glass refilled more often than usual. Diane's rose perfume drifted across the table each time she leaned forward, and my stomach clenched instinctively, an old reflex from an old death. I breathed through it, steady, controlled, the way I'd trained myself to. That was the price of this plan. Sitting across from the people who killed me, smiling, waiting. After dinner, Vivian cornered me on the terrace, her voice dropping into something almost desperate. "Do you know anyone in finance?" she asked. "Someone discreet?" "Why would I know that?" I asked. "No reason," she said, forcing a laugh. "Forget I asked." I watched her walk back inside, heels clicking unevenly against the stone, a small stumble, quickly corrected. In my old life, that sound had haunted me for months afterward. Tonight, it simply told me she was afraid, and fear, in someone like Vivian, always turned into mistakes eventually. I drove home slowly that night, windows cracked to let in the cold sea air. Somewhere behind me, Thornbrook sat glowing on its cliff, beautiful and doomed in equal measure. I thought about my father's old watch on Vivian's wrist, ticking down seconds she didn't yet know were numbered. Soon, very soon, she would understand exactly what she'd taken. But not yet. Not while there was still more to lose. A week later, the second wave landed. I'd asked Marcus to time it precisely, a formal letter from the bank, informing Vivian that the property's original loan was now in active default, with immediate repayment demanded within 30 days. It arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by courier directly to Thornbrook's front door. Frank told me about it first. Oddly enough, his cousin worked maintenance at the estate and mentioned Vivian screaming at someone over the phone that morning, loud enough to carry through the garden hedges. I said nothing, only nodded, sanding a table leg smoother than it needed to be. "Sounds like trouble up there," Frank said, watching me carefully. "Sounds like it," I agreed. That evening, Vivian called me in tears, an unfamiliar sound from someone who rarely cried without an audience worth impressing. "Someone's trying to take the house," she said, voice cracking. "There's some debt Dad never told us about. It's insane, it's got to be a mistake." "That's terrible," I said, and almost meant it, for the length of one breath. "You have to help me," she said. "You're good with contracts. Please." I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering a rooftop, a click of a closing door, footsteps walking calmly away. Then I opened them again, steady and clear. "I'll see what I can find out," I said. It wasn't a lie. I already knew everything there was to find. The following morning, a small item ran in the local business paper, a brief mention of unusual activity around a historic coastal property. No names attached yet, only enough detail to make certain readers pay attention. Diane's phone, I imagined, was already ringing off the hook with concerned society friends asking careful questions. I hadn't planted that story. Not directly. But I'd made sure the right journalist had the right documents at the right time, 3 weeks earlier, filed under a name that wasn't mine. Some fires spread on their own once you've laid the kindling properly. This one was only getting started. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself remember the rooftop in full. Cold concrete. The metallic taste of blood in my mouth. Diane's rose perfume drifting past just before the fall. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, Vivian's laughter fading down the stairwell. I hadn't imagined it. I'd known, even dying, exactly who had done this. I opened my laptop and reread the envelope's contents one more time, the one I'd hidden in my coat pocket weeks ago, the one still burning quietly against my ribs whenever I wore that coat. Inside was a single photograph, taken from a hidden camera at Reyes's own office, time-stamped from before my death in the previous life. It showed Vivian and Diane, together, shaking hands with Salvatore Reyes himself. I hadn't understood its full meaning back then, not in my old life. This time, I understood every piece of it. They hadn't just taken advantage of my father's debt after his death. They had known about it while he was still alive, and they had let him die owing it, quietly, patiently, waiting for their moment. My moment had finally come too. The house was rotting from the inside now, exactly as I'd planned. But something in that photograph told me the rot went deeper than I'd first realized, deeper than a single loan or a single betrayal. Diane hadn't simply married into a mess. She'd built it, brick by careful brick, long before I ever fell from that rooftop at all. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands steady despite everything. Whatever they'd built together, I intended to watch it collapse completely. And when it did, they would finally understand something I'd known since the moment I opened my eyes in that childhood bedroom, alive again, unafraid. I had never forgotten a single second of dying. 3 days later, I confronted Vivian at Thornbrook, standing on the same terrace where she'd once announced my lack of ambition to a crowd of laughing strangers. The string lights were gone now, replaced by a single bare bulb over the kitchen door. The gardenias had wilted, unwatered, drooping over cracked stone planters. "You've been distant," Vivian said, arms crossed against the cold. "Ever since the loan thing started." "I've been busy," I said. "Work. Must be nice," she said, bitterness leaking through her careful composure. "Not having anything real to lose." I studied her face, the shadows under her eyes deeper now, foundation failing to hide them completely. Her hands, once so steady with champagne glasses, trembled slightly around her coffee cup. Somewhere behind her calm mask, panic was finally beginning to show through, thin cracks spreading across polished porcelain. "I heard the debt's bigger than they first said," I said carefully. "Is that true?" Her jaw tightened. "It's handled." It wasn't handled. I knew, because Marcus had shown me the full figure that morning, a number large enough to swallow the estate twice over, interest compounding weekly under terms Reyes rarely bothered explaining twice. Vivian had signed documents she never fully read, too dazzled by the house to notice the trap closing gently around her wrist. "If you need help," I said, "you know where to find me." She looked at me then, really looked, something almost suspicious flickering behind her eyes. For one long moment, I thought she might finally see it, the calm calculation behind my sympathy, the years of patience hiding underneath my tired cardigan. Then she blinked, and the moment passed, swallowed by her own desperate need to believe I was still harmless. "I don't need your help," she said, turning back toward the house. I watched her walk away, shoulders stiff, footsteps no longer quite so confident against the stone. Somewhere inside that house, evidence was already gathering dust in file boxes with my name quietly attached to half of it. She had no idea how much closer the ending truly was. That was the last time I saw her smile without fear behind it. The second escalation came a week later, sharper and crueler than anything before. I arrived at my apartment to find Daniel waiting outside my door, my fiancé from before, though we hadn't spoken in this timeline yet at all. He looked confused, holding his phone out toward me like evidence of a crime. "Vivian said you two were never serious," he said. "She said you'd want me to know she's interested." My stomach turned cold, old memories surfacing fast and sharp. In my previous life, Vivian had done exactly this, waited until I was weakest, then taken the one person who still believed in me. This time, we weren't even engaged yet, but the pattern held perfectly, cruel and familiar. "When did she tell you that?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Last night," he said. "At some dinner party. She was very convincing." I almost laughed. Though nothing about it was funny. Vivian had reached further than I'd expected. Further than even my old memories had warned me to prepare for. She wasn't simply defending herself anymore. She was lashing out, wild and desperate, trying to hurt me before I could finish whatever she suspected I was building. "Do whatever you want," I told Daniel. "I'm not stopping you." He looked surprised by my calm, maybe even disappointed by it. I closed the door gently once he left, then sat on my kitchen floor for a long moment, breathing through something that felt dangerously close to old grief. This wasn't my life to save this time. It never had been. I had bigger things to protect than a man who could be talked away so easily. That night, the rose perfume hit me again, unexpectedly, from a woman passing on the street outside my window. My chest tightened instantly, an old rooftop rising fast behind my eyes, cold concrete, blood pooling warm, then cooling, footsteps walking calmly away without looking back. I gripped the windowsill until the memory finally passed. Soon, I told myself. Soon that scent would mean nothing at all. I called Marcus the next morning, my voice steadier than I felt. "Move up the timeline," I said. "I want the public exposure ready within 2 weeks. "That's fast," he said. "We're still finalizing some of the documentation." "I don't care," I said. "She's getting reckless." Reckless people talk. He was quiet for a moment, papers shuffling somewhere on his end. "There's something else," he finally said. "The private investigator found records connecting Diane directly to Reyes, dated years before your father's death." I sat down slowly, my pulse quickening despite myself. "How many years?" "6, Marcus said. "Maybe longer." "I'm still tracing it." 6 years. That meant Diane had known Reyes long before my father's health began failing. Long before any loan was ever signed against Thornbrook at all. I thought about every dinner. Every quiet smile. Every rose-scented hug she'd given me over the years. All of it built on a foundation I was only now beginning to understand. "Keep tracing it," I said. "I want everything before we move." That evening, sitting alone with my father's old photographs spread across my kitchen table, I finally allowed myself to open the question I'd avoided since waking up in that childhood bedroom weeks ago. Had my father's death truly been natural, as everyone always claimed? Or had Diane's patience simply run out one convenient evening? I didn't have proof yet. But I intended to find it, one careful step at a time. The following days blurred together in careful, quiet motion. I met Marcus twice more, each time in that same leather-scented office, papers stacking higher with every visit. I visited Frank's shop most evenings, sanding wood until my hands ached, letting sawdust settle into the cracks of my palms like something almost like peace. "You're building towards something big," Frank said one night, not quite a question. "I am," I admitted. "Your father would have been proud," he said quietly. "He always said you were the sharp one." I didn't tell him how sharp, exactly. I didn't tell him about rooftops or falling or footsteps walking calmly away. Some things, I decided, were mine alone to carry until the very end. Frank simply nodded, handed me another tool, and let the silence between us say everything words couldn't. 2 weeks passed in this careful rhythm, evidence gathering during daylight, quiet grief and sawdust in the evenings, rose perfume occasionally ambushing me on street corners at the worst possible moments. Vivian grew thinner, sharper, more brittle with each family dinner, her laughter increasingly forced, her makeup increasingly heavy around tired eyes. Diane, though, remained maddeningly composed throughout it all. If she suspected anything building against her, she never once showed it, sipping tea with the same steady hand, offering the same warm smiles across the dinner table. That composure unsettled me more than Vivian's cracking ever did. Diane had practiced this kind of calm before. I could feel it now. 10 days before the deadline, Marcus called with news that finally answered one question I'd carried since childhood. The investigator confirmed it, he said, voice careful. Your father's original will named you as sole heir to Thornbrook. Diane had it changed 8 months before he died. I sat perfectly still, phone pressed hard against my ear. How? Forged signature, notarized by someone Ray's paid off, Marcus said. It's all documented. Photographs, bank transfers, everything. Somewhere deep inside me, something that had been quietly bracing itself for years finally allowed itself to exhale. It wasn't just betrayal after death. It had been theft, calculated and cold. Executed while my father still breathed in the next room, unaware his own wife had already begun erasing his true wishes. Send me everything, I said. I want it ready for the exposure. That question, the one I'd carried silently since waking, finally had its answer. But it opened another, sharper and more dangerous than the first. If Diane had forged documents while my father still lived, how far exactly had she been willing to go to make sure he never changed his mind again? I didn't want that answer yet. But I suspected, deep down, I already knew it. 5 days before the deadline, I finally understood why Diane's composure had never cracked. Marcus called me at midnight, his voice tight with something close to alarm. She's been moving money, he said. Offshore, through accounts we didn't know existed until tonight. How much? I asked. Sitting up in the dark. Enough to run, he said. Enough to disappear completely, if she wanted to. I felt my pulse spike, old panic rising fast from somewhere deep and familiar. In my previous life, people like Diane always seemed to slip through cracks exactly when it mattered most, vanishing before consequences ever fully landed. I wasn't going to let history repeat that particular mistake. Not this time. Not after everything already spent. Freeze it, I said. Whatever it takes, freeze every account tonight. That requires a judge's signature, Marcus said. At midnight, that's not exactly simple. Then make it simple, I said. You know people who owe you favors. Use them now. He was quiet for a long moment, papers rustling somewhere on his end of the line. You really did plan for everything. Didn't you? He finally said, not quite a question anymore. Almost everything, I admitted. This part, I'm improvising. By 2 in the morning, an emergency injunction froze Diane's offshore accounts, filed through a judge Marcus had once helped during a messy custody dispute years earlier. I sat awake the rest of that night, watching headlights sweep occasionally across my bedroom ceiling, waiting for confirmation that the trap had finally closed completely around her. Confirmation came just before dawn, gray light creeping slowly through my curtains. Diane's accounts were frozen. Her passport, flagged. Whatever escape she'd been quietly preparing for weeks had collapsed in the span of a few frantic hours, thanks to one phone call made at exactly the right moment. I allowed myself 30 minutes of sleep before getting up to face the day ahead. That morning, I drove past Thornbrook one final time before everything detonated publicly. Workers were already dismantling the half-finished pool over the west lawn. Environmental inspectors in white suits moving carefully across contaminated soil with sample kits and clipboards. The house itself looked smaller somehow, stripped of its party lights and champagne crowds. I didn't stop the car. I simply slowed, watching through the window as strangers in protective gear documented the exact poison I'd known was waiting beneath that lawn for months. Somewhere inside the house, Vivian was likely still asleep, unaware her final morning of comfortable ignorance had already quietly ended. I drove away without looking back. My hands steady on the wheel. The deadline arrived on a Thursday, gray and windless over the water. Ray's 30 days had finally run out, and with them, every careful thread I'd spent weeks weaving pulled taut at once. I woke early, dressed in black, and drove to Marcus's office before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops. "Everything's staged," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "One signal from you, and it all moves together." "Move it," I said. "Now." By noon, the first domino fell. A financial journalist published the full story online: forged documents, hidden loans, a mafia-adjacent lender named Salvatore Reyes attached to a family long considered untouchable in the city. The article included photographs. It included bank records. It included a timeline nobody could argue with. By 1 o'clock, Vivian's phone was ringing constantly. By 2, the bank formally froze all accounts connected to Thornbrook, citing fraud investigation protocols. Vivian's credit cards stopped working mid-transaction at a downtown boutique. The humiliation of it caught on a stranger's phone and posted online within the hour. Strangers laughed at her now, the way she'd once laughed at me. By 3, Marcus filed formal legal action on my behalf, naming both Diane and Vivian in a civil suit tied directly to the forged inheritance documents. Police detectives, already alerted through an anonymous tip weeks earlier, arrived at Thornbrook within the hour, asking careful, pointed questions nobody there could answer honestly. It happened exactly like dominoes falling fast, clean, unstoppable once tipped. By 4, Vivian's last remaining ally, a business partner who'd helped secure her original financing, publicly withdrew his support in a brief statement to the press. He cited concerns about integrity, which was corporate language for times I refused to sink with this ship. Vivian had built her empire on borrowed trust, and every lender was calling it in at once. By 5, Ray's own people arrived at Thornbrook's front gate, no longer discreet about their business. 2 black cars idled in the driveway, engines running, doors unopened. Diane watched from an upstairs window, her rose perfume, I imagined, doing nothing at all to calm the fear finally catching up with her. The trap and the counterattack had detonated at exactly the same moment. I drove out to Thornbrook that evening, unable to stay away any longer. The gates stood open, abandoned by whoever usually managed them. String lights from the party months earlier still hung between the columns, half burnt out, swaying uselessly in the wind. The pool over the west lawn sat half-finished, cracked concrete already sinking unevenly into contaminated soil beneath. Vivian stood on the terrace alone, mascara streaked down her face, my father's watch missing from her wrist. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of every glittering thing that once made her seem untouchable. When she saw me approaching, something raw and furious flickered across her exhausted face. "You did this," she said. "Somehow, I know you did this." "Did what?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even. "Don't," she snapped. "Don't pretend. The lawyer, the reporter, the bank. It's all connected to you, I can feel it." I studied her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. Behind her, I caught a faint trace of her usual perfume, but weaker now, almost gone entirely. Like even the scent itself had finally run out of power over me. The anchor I'd carried for years suddenly felt lighter. "You handed me the trap yourself," I finally said. "I just made sure it worked." Her face went pale beneath the smeared makeup. "What are you talking about?" "You wanted the house so badly," I said. "You never once asked why I gave it up so easily." Understanding crept slowly across her features, replacing fury with something closer to horror. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew about the debt from the beginning." "I knew everything," I said. "The debt. The forged will. The loan shark you and your mother shook hands with years before Dad even died. I knew all of it. Because I lived through it once already. In a life you ended on a rooftop." She staggered back a step, hand pressed against her chest. "That's insane." "That's not." "You laughed," I said quietly. Walking away. I heard it, right before everything went dark. The silence that followed felt enormous, filled only by wind moving through the dying gardenias and distant waves against the cliffs below. Vivian opened her mouth twice, closing it again both times, no defense sturdy enough to withstand what I'd just placed between us, plain and undeniable at last. I don't remember any rooftop, she finally said, voice trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. You will, I said. Everyone will, soon enough. I turned and walked back toward my car, leaving her standing alone on that crumbling terrace, surrounded by unfinished construction and dying flowers. Behind me, I heard her sink slowly onto a stone bench, the sound of quiet, broken crying finally reaching my ears the way I'd once imagined it might, years ago. It didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like the beginning of an ending. 3 days later, the full scope of Diane's involvement became public through Marcus's formal court filing. Investigators confirmed the forged will, the notarized fraud, and 6 years of financial entanglement with Salvatore Reyes, predating my father's declining health by a significant margin. The story dominated local headlines for nearly a week. Diane was arrested on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week I had once died. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but Frank described it to me afterward, his voice quiet with something between satisfaction and sorrow. 2 detectives, a pair of handcuffs, and a stunned silence from the neighbors watching from their windows. Vivian avoided formal charges, narrowly, though her reputation and finances collapsed entirely within the same week. Thornbrook itself was seized as part of the ongoing investigation, its contaminated soil finally exposed publicly through an environmental inspection. Marcus had quietly requested months before, time to land at precisely this moment. Everything I'd built had detonated exactly as planned, all at once, unstoppable. I met Marcus one final time that week, his office slightly less chaotic than before, papers finally organized into neat, closed files. He studied me for a long moment across his desk, something like respect flickering behind his tired eyes. You planned this from the very beginning, he said. Didn't you? Every piece of it. I had practice, I said again. The same words I'd given him weeks before. I don't think I want to know what that means, he said. Probably safer that way, I agreed, and we left it there, unspoken and understood. Walking to my car afterward, I finally let myself acknowledge the biggest question I'd carried since waking in that childhood bedroom months earlier, not whether I could destroy them, but whether destroying them would actually feel like enough. Standing there, keys in hand, I realized the answer wasn't quite what I'd expected. It felt necessary. It didn't feel like healing. Not yet. I visited Vivian one last time, 2 weeks later, in a small rented apartment far from the coast. The building smelled of instant noodles and mildew, nothing like the gardenias and champagne she once surrounded herself with. She opened the door slowly, dark circles under her eyes, wearing clothes I didn't recognize from any version of her life. Come to gloat? She asked, voice flat and hollow. No, I said. Come to finish something. She stepped aside, letting me into a cramped living room stacked with unopened moving boxes. A single lamp lit the space, casting long shadows across bare walls. She sat heavily on a second-hand couch, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together that had already broken. Why? She asked. After everything, why come here at all? Because you still don't understand what happened, I said. And I want you to, before I walk away for good. She looked up sharply, something desperate flickering behind her exhaustion. Then explain it. Make me understand. I sat across from her, close enough to see every crack in her composure now fully exposed. In my last life, I said, you and your mother let me fight for that house until it broke me completely. Then, when I finally won it back, you pushed me off a rooftop rather than lose it. Her face went white. That's not possible. I would never. You did, I said. I remember every second of it. The cold. The blood. Your laughter. Walking away. I don't remember that, she whispered. I swear to you, I don't remember any of it. I believe you, I said. Because it hasn't happened yet. In this life. You were never given the chance. She stared at me, uncomprehending, grief and confusion warring visibly across her exhausted features. Then none of this makes sense, she said. Why punish me for something I haven't done? Because you would have. I said quietly. Given the exact same choices. The exact same greed. You would have done it again. I simply made sure this time. The trap caught you first. She began to cry then. Quiet and broken. No audience left to perform for any more. I watched without moving closer. Without offering comfort, I no longer had any intention of giving. Some debts, I had learned, could only be settled with truth, not tenderness, not forgiveness she hadn't earned. There's something else, I said, once her crying had quieted slightly. Something you still don't know. She wiped her face, looking up warily. What? Your mother didn't just forge Dad's will after he died, I said. She started planning years before that, back when he was still healthy enough to change his mind. Frank found records last week, old prescriptions, refilled far more often than any doctor had approved. Vivian's breath caught audibly. You're saying I'm saying the investigation isn't finished, I said. I'm saying you should prepare yourself for more than just fraud charges landing on your mother's name eventually. The color drained further from her already pale face. Whatever fragile composure she'd been clinging to finally shattered completely, replaced by something rawer and more frightened than anything I'd witnessed from her since this entire war began. For once, I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. Only exhaustion, and something close to grief for a life we'd both lost long before either of us understood what was truly at stake. Did you know? She asked. About Dad, I mean, before any of this started. I suspected, I said. I didn't know for certain until recently. And you still let me lose everything first, she said, before telling me any of it. You took everything from me first, I said. In a life you don't even remember living. I decided a long time ago that fairness was never going to be part of how this ended. She didn't argue with that. There was nothing left in her to argue with anymore. I stood to leave, pausing once at the door, looking back at the wreckage of a life I had, in some very real sense, personally engineered to collapse. Vivian remained on the couch, small and diminished, staring blankly at boxes she hadn't yet found the strength to unpack. For what it's worth, I said, I didn't enjoy this. Not the way you might think. Then why do it? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because the version of me who didn't fight back is already dead, I said. I wasn't willing to become her again. I left without waiting for a response, closing the door quietly behind me. The stairwell smelled of old paint and cigarette smoke, nothing like the sandalwood and roses I'd once associated with danger. Walking down those steps, I realized something had finally, permanently shifted inside my chest. The rooftop no longer owned me. I had taken that power back myself, piece by careful piece. Frank called me the following week, his voice warmer than I'd heard it in months. There's someone here asking about you, he said. Says he's been looking for you a long time. I drove to his shop that evening, uncertain what to expect. Sawdust hung thick in the air as usual, warm light spilling from a single overhead bulb. An older man sat waiting near the workbench, silver-haired, weathered hands folded patiently in his lap. Something about his eyes felt achingly familiar. You don't remember me, he said, standing slowly. But I remember you. From before. My chest tightened instantly. Before what? Exactly? The rooftop, he said quietly. I was the building's night security guard. I found you first. I sat down hard on a nearby stool, the workshop suddenly spinning slightly around me. You were there? I called the ambulance, he said. Too late, but I tried. I never forgot your face, not once, not in all these years since. He explained, slowly and carefully, that he'd spent years afterward investigating quietly on his own time, suspicious of the official stories surrounding my death. He'd gathered small fragments of evidence himself, keeping them safe, waiting for someone, anyone, who might eventually need them. When Marcus's name started appearing in local headlines, he'd finally decided to come forward. I kept a recording, he said. Security footage, actually, from that same stairwell. Nobody ever asked me for it, back then. My hands trembled slightly as he handed me a small, unmarked flash drive. Why keep it this long? I asked. Why not go to the police immediately? Because everyone with money told me to forget what I saw, he said simply. But I never forgot. Some things, you just carry until it's finally time to put them down. I clutched that small drive tightly in my palm, the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized was still missing. It wasn't proof I needed anymore, not legally, not with everything else already collapsing publicly around Diane and Vivian both. But it was something else entirely, confirmation, undeniable and complete, that I had never imagined any part of that fall. That my death had been exactly as real, and exactly as deliberate, as I always remembered it being. I thanked him quietly, unable to find bigger words for what his years of patience had finally given me. He nodded once, understanding perfectly without needing further explanation, then returned to whatever quiet life he'd built for himself since that terrible night so long ago. Walking back to my car, I finally allowed myself to cry, just once, just briefly, for the woman I'd been before all of this began. She deserved that much, at least a moment of grief, honestly felt, before I finally let her rest completely. The final court proceedings concluded a month later. Quiet and mostly procedural by that point. Diane accepted a plea deal, avoiding trial in exchange for a lengthy sentence that would keep her far away from coastlines and champagne for the remainder of her life. Vivian, cleared of criminal charges but financially ruined beyond recovery, moved to another city entirely, seeking whatever fresh start still remained possible for her. I never spoke to either of them again. Thornbrook itself was condemned within the year. The contaminated soil too extensive and expensive to properly remediate. Crews eventually demolished the house entirely, clearing the land for a public park instead, funded partly through a settlement I quietly redirected rather than claim for myself. Some inheritances, I decided, weren't worth keeping. Even once rightfully cleared of every stain. I kept only one thing from that entire estate: my father's watch, recovered from an evidence locker months after Vivian's arrest. I wore it now on quiet mornings, its steady ticking a small, private reminder of everything survived, everything finally settled. Spring arrived early that year, warm and unhurried along the coast. I stood at the edge of what used to be Thornbrook's western lawn, now freshly seeded with new grass, children's laughter drifting faintly from a playground being built nearby. Sunlight warmed my shoulders, gentle and undemanding, nothing like the harsh gold lighting of parties long since ended. Frank joined me there occasionally, sharing coffee from a thermos, saying little, needing to say even less. The rose perfume that once haunted every quiet corner of my life had finally, completely lost its power over me. When I caught its scent now, drifting past on some stranger's collar, it meant nothing at all anymore. Just perfume. Just flowers. Nothing more. I built a small architecture practice of my own that year, modest but entirely mine, built without borrowed contacts or stolen proposals. Daniel eventually reached out once, tentative and apologetic. But I let that particular door stay closed. Some things, once broken cleanly enough, were better left exactly where they'd fallen. I thought sometimes about the woman who died on that rooftop, cold concrete against her back, blood cooling slowly beneath her. I didn't hate her anymore, the way I once had, for being too trusting, too slow to recognize danger, circling patiently around her. She had simply been unprepared for a world that never once played fair with her. This time, I made sure I was. Standing there in the warm spring sunlight, wind moving softly through new grass, I finally let myself feel something close to peace. Not happiness exactly, not forgiveness either, but something quieter and sturdier than both. A kind of stillness earned through patience, through calculation, through refusing to be surprised twice by the same cruelty. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply stood there, breathing salt air, letting sunlight settle warm against my skin. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed on the new playground, bright and unburdened by anything I'd survived to make that laughter possible. I turned toward the sound, smiling faintly, and started walking home. Some victories, I'd learned, didn't need an audience at all. They only needed to be real. I died once, betrayed by people who called themselves family. I came back, and this time, I made sure the betrayal belonged entirely to them. I think about the click of that rooftop door more than I expect to, even now. Not with fear anymore. Just with recognition, the way you notice an old scar in passing light. Grief and calculation can live in the same chest. I learned that the hard way. Twice over. Once dying and once rebuilding. Neither version of me regrets the woman I became to survive it. People ask sometimes why I never confronted Diane in prison, never wrote letters, never demanded an apology I knew would never come honestly. The truth is simpler than they expect. Some people don't deserve the weight of your voice. Silence, aimed correctly, can be its own kind of sentence. I still keep Frank's flash drive in a small box on my dresser, unopened since that first night. I don't need to watch it again. Knowing it exists was always enough to finally let the rooftop go. Some nights, walking home past the new park where Thornbrook once stood, I hear children laughing near the swings, bright and careless against the darkening sky. I used to think peace would feel triumphant. It doesn't. It feels quiet, ordinary, almost forgettable, which is exactly why I treasure it now. I built my life twice. Only one version of it was ever truly mine. Sometimes strangers ask how I stayed so calm through all of it. They imagine rage, or tears, or some dramatic breaking point along the way. The truth is quieter than that. Rage burns fast and blinds you. Patience simply waits, watching, until the moment finally arrives. I chose patience twice, once falling, once climbing back. It cost me more than anyone watching from the outside could ever fully understand. But it gave me spring mornings like this one, sunlight warm across my shoulders, no rooftop waiting anywhere above me. I no longer flinch at the sound of heels on marble. I no longer brace myself at rose perfume drifting past on a stranger. Those small, ordinary freedoms mean more to me now than any courtroom victory ever could. That, more than anything else, is how I know I finally won. Not the headlines. Not the frozen accounts, or the handcuffs, or the empty house crumbling on its cliff. Just the quiet, unremarkable mornings that followed, stitched together one ordinary day at a time, entirely my own. If you were me, would you have saved her anyway, or walked away the moment you understood the truth? Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight?